Great. Hey, welcome back, Nathan.
Thank you, Ian. I love being here.
Right. So you've talked to me before about living a life of abandonment and like a reckless life of faith. What does that mean to you?
Reckless life of faith. Well, there's a lot to go into on that part, Ian. Let's start with a short overview, if I can, and let you dig deeper where it strikes you. Reckless abandonment to trusting God is kind of a summation of my current chapter in life with my wife. That's kind of a term we came together on. And it literally just means, regardless of what anyone says. Now, when I say anyone, we all know secular society. They're they're so off the rails. We don't really need to care about what they're saying. But even those who do truly have your best interest in mind, very oftentimes fellow parishioners or uh, even friends and family or parents, oftentimes they we are all influenced by our raising and our societal life. And so what they believe is best for you may or may not be what you're being called to. So through prayer and study and discussion with our Lord in adoration and with my spouse, doing what you feel is called right, regardless of whether that is, as some will say, the prudent course of action or the um, the safe route or the financially stable route. You have a family to think of. So reckless abandonment is when you feel called, pray on it, meditate on it, and then just say, Lord, if you're talking to me, talk to me in a way that I can't argue you answered me. And he always will give an answer. And then you roll with it, even if it angers everyone you've ever known. You abandon yourself in, to the world's view, a completely reckless and irrational choices because you know you're called by God and you roll with it knowing he will lead you. That's really it.
I can think of so many people, and this really ties in with like the work with the incubator, that people feel a calling to do something, but they're not free to do it. And we kind of try and come along the side of just supporting them, like practically like helping them do that. But there's also a thing that they have to do themselves, is they have to become free of being tied down. I'm personally really resonate with this because like for instance, I'm thinking like say if you're called to be a father and provide for your kids, like there's so much pressure from the world, potentially from your family, to get like a certain house, a certain
Yes.
income. And when maybe you just want to have a homestead or something, you want to live a simpler life and a better life, or say you want to have a certain, like for me, I really want to work for the church full time. I want to work in evangelism, but to maybe somebody, who's kind of more in the world is like, well, how can you get a job like that? I think they kind of come up with reasons like, how can you have a good life? They just don't have the faith to see.
Yeah. And that is not an easy step by any means to gain that level of trust. It is difficult. It's trying. It will challenge you in ways you didn't know you could be challenged. Um, but it's stripping away all of the things that the world has impositioned upon our own minds and how we think we're thinking about things, when in actuality, the only thing that matters is salvation. So if this upsets someone else's opinion, that's not between you and God. That's between them and God. So why that should not, doesn't mean it doesn't, have an effect on how you think or the actions or choices you make. So it's stripping away this idea that anyone or anything should have any influence on you other than the divine will itself. Fall within the parameters of the teaching of the Catholic Church, read and study the Holy Gospel, live according to the inspiration he gives you. Nothing else matters. He will provide everything else.
Wow. So it sounds like you've experienced this yourself. So you've
Yeah,
experienced this like being detached from the world, and just what's that like, and what's your story? How did you get to that point?
it. We may have touched on this in one of the other podcasts, but I will. I'll try and keep it short. We began with a many years ago. We're going on not quite 2 decades, but it's getting closer. And it was the where in my life am I different? I'm supposed to be a good Catholic. I've got a good wife. I attend a good parish, blah, blah, blah. But outside of the church, when I'm not at Mass on Sunday or attending a men's group or something to do with the church. Now, that irked me badly. And then we were gifted a book by a friend Catholic. It was by a Catholic author called named by the name of Matthew Kelly. And while reading that book, is called The 7 Signs of a Dynamic Catholic. It challenges you to take 1 week of your time and calculate the hours you are spending on each particular activity that you do. It doesn't have to be exact, but an estimate, a good guess. And so at the end of that week, calculate the hours, and whatever you spend the most amount of hours on is your current God at that point in your life. My wife and I did that together, and we both looked at each other and were like, dear God, help us. Because prayer, spiritual growth, and living the Gospels is like 85th on the list of what we're spending time on. And that really was a turning point and a refocusing for us. And we began taking every step we could to change that and make our Lord and the Gospels our primary focus in every moment of every day.
Yeah. So, okay. So how did that happen for you? That's amazing. And I think I've heard this story from actually, is it Elliot
Oh,
Hulse? Yeah,
yeah.
I think you talked to, yeah, that's like a key part of your story. So I've not actually heard this before on this podcast. So when did this happen? Like what was your living situation at the time? And then what happened afterwards? Like you started to realize that the Lord wasn't the Lord of your life, in so many
Yeah.
ways that so what was that transition like? And what things were taken away? How did some things change?
Okay. Yeah. Well, at the time we were renting a small house, but it was a wonderful house. It was sitting on about an acre and a half. It was down in the corner of this gentleman's house. He lived up a property. He lived up higher on the hill. He had about 30 acres. It was gorgeous, beautiful location, reasonable rent, and I had a very good job. I was a kind of like a physical therapist slash personal trainer, and bills were paid, everything was met. Traditional Catholic Church was close by. We read this and we were like, okay, well, we're saying our daily rosary, we're doing our morning prayers, we're going to Mass on Sunday. What are steps that we can take? Well, the first step we can take is an outward showing, because the outward showing is more for myself than for anyone else. So I started wearing Benedictine, like it was like a 3-inch Benedictine crucifix on the outside of my work shirt, because there was a uniform at the job, every day. And I got tons of flack for it. But for that first 12 months of doing that, it taught me how to defend my faith, because now nobody knew before. Now I had to talk about it all day, every day. Every client who came in, every coworker, the boss. Come on, man, you're not trying to force that down somebody else's throat. So that was a great thing for me. My wife took on in the home, and I would encourage this when I was there, every single question that the kids have. And we all know they never not have questions. If they're awake, they're asking questions. Was God gave us this, and here's why. God meant that to happen, and here's why. God intended it to be this way, and here's why. And over the next few years, it turned God into like a living, breathing member of our family. every choice, every action, every question is referred back to God. If the kids say, "That's awesome, Daddy did a great job fixing the lawnmower," it's like, God gave me the ability, right? So
That's amazing.
let me show you what God showed me how to do, and then you can show someone else what God showed us how to do.
That
And
just
so
brings.
between those two things, over 2 years, God became, it felt like he was sitting at the dinner table with us every day.
Oh, that's amazing. So you're just bringing. You're not bringing the Lord into your life. He's already there. You're just finding God. There's actually a quote I think from Saint Ignatius would find God in all things, and
Yeah.
that's not a way of saying like God is in nature and stuff like that. I think we've got to look at it the lens that he saw it in the 15th century. That actually that since God is the creator of everything and that everything is to glorify him. That's in the first principle and foundation in the spiritual exercises that you know that is the order of things that everything is made to glorify him and everything that we have in our lives, every possession we have is just an instrument to glorify God. So
Yeah.
Teaching kids that at a young age, like God is involved in everything. And I'm sure there's a way of doing that is just so natural and normal. And maybe a lot of I think maybe a lot there are all the reasons people just don't like things of the faith. Oh, it's too much, it's too intense. It's because it's an alien experience to live and breathe and just move in a culture that's so full of God. And I think it's wonderful that you wore your crucifix. I've got a friend in Plymouth who always wears a St. Francis crucifix. He's a university student,
Yeah.
and it's so brave, honestly. And I feel like there's just so many ways that people aren't free.
Yeah.
Just to and just thinking that before you did that, how do you feel now after? Like with both instances with your kids and with the crucifix, how do you feel after doing that?
Uh, I would have to say I felt super powered. It was like my faith was alive within me for the first time. I'm a cradle Catholic, but it felt like it was truly alive in me. And I was actually, it wasn't a go to church thing and act pious. It was like a living force within me. I don't know how else to explain it. You just want to talk about God. You want to engage with others. You're excited about the Gospels. Like you read the Gospels in the morning. My wife and I read them every morning. And I want to go to work and tell people what I read and what it meant to me because it's so exciting. And that doesn't go away. So while during this time, it's about 2.5 years of this, as we did this more, we actually started the process of what physical things, most of these things at that time, fairly newly married, first couple years, were things we had as children, of things of the past. Do you really not want to let go? What things just matter the most? Oh, this was a gift from Uncle Dan, whatever it happens to be. And we started looking for ways and finding ways to give these items either to a charity or to a family that was struggling. And we started very slowly getting rid of the things that held the greatest sentimental value to us so that we could shift our minds from attachment to things of this world, which, as we just said, aren't ours anyway, to the only things that really matter in this world, and that is the eternal souls in our children, so that our heads were free to focus entirely on these eternal souls.
That just reminds me of fasting. It kind of seems like, I'm just mindful of people listening to this podcast who are just completely new to the faith. And there's this term called like penance, of certain acts we can do that they're not so much. Sometimes they can be painful, uncomfortable. I'm thinking of like, I'm gonna skip on. I'm just gonna eat bread today, or I'm just gonna. But it's always for a purpose. It's not just that to show that you're a spiritual warrior or that you're a minimalist or something. It always has God as the objective. So like the reason why we give up food is so that we do not live on bread alone. And the reason why possessions, too many possessions, they can really just dampen our spiritual life. And it's just really inspiring listening to that. And I'm just thinking in the back of my mind, like there's probably so many people listening now thinking, oh, I am burdened by this. I'm burdened by what people think. I'm burdened about all these things I'm responsible for in my life, or just all these possessions, all these things that I'm feeling I'm losing my peace. But it sounds like you're giving very practical ways on how to do that. Just like, firstly, make an exterior proclamation of faith. The people around you know that you're Catholic, and then you're kind of saying, get rid of the stuff that you don't need and give it to those who actually need it. So
right,
yeah, and it sounds like as you're doing these things, you're becoming more and more focused on the Lord. And I'm just wondering, like, your advice on just these concrete things are really helpful.
Well, thank you, Ian. They were extremely helpful to me and my family, and so if it can help others, that would be fantastic. It's really letting go of physical items. It hurts, like on a deep emotional level, especially when you first start doing it. It really hurts. You're like, I didn't know that I'm hurting for 2 weeks after giving up that coat that, was a gift for my 18th birthday or whatever. But I gave it to the family that can't afford a coat right now. I don't need it. I have more coats that fit me even better, right? But I didn't realize I would miss a thing. And so it really sparks this inner reflection of how attached am I? I didn't realize I was so attached to things, and these things are keeping my headspace occupied, and it's holding God out. There's a huge revelation for myself.
And so your story then, so you're giving up these things, you're starting to change, you're starting to feel like you're not just a Sunday Catholic, but you're living this faith. So what happened after that?
Well, I came to a place in the job I was in that I had pretty much maxed out where I could get as far as career goes. I was head of the facility on my ship. I was like facility manager, and I was kind of a step in periodically for the actual owner boss. I would go to functions for him when he was busy, standing in his place for answering questions to the media, things of that nature. And I was very comfortable financially. I didn't like it. I felt as though I should be doing more for God and also for progressing myself as a man. But I also, and I think this was really the thing that struck me for the last 6 months before I ended up leaving the position, was my hands were tied as to what I could actually do physically to help my clients. Because I was like a physical therapist / personal trainer, and what I could speak on freely because of HIPAA constraints and privacy constraints and all this other stuff. And the facility we were in, you weren't behind locked doors most of the time. It was like an open facility. So I felt I was restricted as to how much help I could actually give these clients, both physically and emotionally, because everyone's struggling with something. And I wanted to be able to be more available for them. And that's really what led my wife and I into the decision of starting my own company. I said, I don't know how to run a company. I've never run a company. God's brought us this far. Let's make it happen. And so we stepped out of the financial security just recklessly, as I say in the title, reckless abandonment. The most reckless, stupidest thing you can possibly do as far as a man with children. and we threw financial security right out the window and said, God, teach us how to run a company. And I rented a little tiny studio room and we began. So I said, use what I already have. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. I'm opening up a facility that has some equipment for basic training, but mostly in the way of rehab, physical training, and offer like women's and men's individual self-defense classes to keep yourself safe from violent aggression.
So it sounds like
so that's what it did. Say again?
So it sounds like you shifted more into it. Yeah, just hearing what you say, sounds like you're shifting more into a mindset of helping others.
Yes, very much. It stopped being provide for myself and my family, and it started being what can I offer to those outside of myself. Very much so.
Right. I'm seeing a definite development here. And it's interesting that happened after you kind of surrendered yourself to the Lord. So it's quite interesting that, you know, once we surrender our lives to the Lord, we not only give up things that are sinful, but things just stopping us be who we fully are meant to be, what we're called to do. That then what happens after that, or maybe at the same time, is this outward look of your love increases, and you start to see your vocation manifest through love, and that will always be to be an instrument of his love to others.
Absolutely. I personally like to say that, and I've given this advice to countless young men over the years, and it doesn't really matter what direction you start walking in life, making choices, taking steps. But if you're standing still wondering when God's going to come show you the way, he cannot direct your steps because you're not taking any. But even if you begin walking in the wrong direction, now you're moving, he can steer you onto the right track you're supposed to be on.
That is a fascinating question. That is, sorry, not a question, but a statement, because so many people are also discerning, like, what's my vocation? You know, that so many of us who are many years into the faith, there's this paralysis of analysis kind of thing. But, you know, God actually can't, it's kind of actually, maybe this is a really bad way to put it, but it's kind of like tying God's hands. You're kind of saying, I don't want to have free will. I want you to decide for me. But God saying, no, I create you with free will. So you have to choose. You have to walk, as he's saying, and then he'll guide you. It's kind of like a shepherd. A shepherd cannot guide a sheep who's just not walking. Like,
yeah,
you know,
anyone who's ever been around farm animals, if they're not moving, you're not getting any job done that day.
If they're not moving, then they're probably dead.
Yeah, usually. But that also brings us to, I believe it was St. Thomas Aquinas, who said, the way our Lord wants us to be saints is depicted in the artwork of the ancients. If you look at the Buddhist statues and the Hindu statues and the Muslim statues, look at the sculptures. They all have their eyes closed, focusing on this inward enlightenment, right? But if you look at the sculptures, the Catholic sculptures from ancient Christendom, their eyes are like almost too big. They're almost bugging out of their head. It's because it's not about me. It's all about taking God through me into the world.
Yes.
It's all about helping others, not sit still and empty your mind. No. It's about empty your mind only in the way of letting God push you, your ego, out of the way so that you can allow him to move through you for others.
And it's just, wow, like you being a father, like the best thing a man can do is to be a father, you know, whichever way that is. But when you think of just our Father in heaven, of like how it just can't put it into words, how selfless he is, how, you know, the core, you know, core Catholic theology talking about like, why did God create? You know, you look at different religions like Islam, you know, like, well, God created us to serve him, to worship him, like he needs us to worship him. But obviously the actual reality is that it's because of mercy. You know, it's just an outpouring of love. Like the Lord cannot help but love and create. That's just who he is. You've got this community of love with the persons of the Trinity, one God, three persons, a community of love. And it's just what you're saying is like, the more you follow the Lord, the more you become like him, in a way that you become this, you become fully who you're meant to be, made in his image, and an outpouring of love,
Yes. Well, isn't that the whole goal here?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why St. John Chrysostom says the same things as St. Peter the Apostle said, as the same things as St. Therese of Lisieux said, hundreds and hundreds of years apart on different continents. They're saying the same things because truth is universal. Love is universal. God is truth. God is love. The closer you come to him, the more like him you become, as you just said, meaning the more like him you are able to affect the world. Look at what he did. He changed the course of human history. One man. The more like him you become, the greater effect you can have in the goodness of all people.